This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. We are Faith Assembly of God, P.O. Box 331, Smiths Grove, Kentucky, 42171. Faith Assembly of God, P.O. Box 331, Smiths Grove, Kentucky, 42171. We're coming to you from our prayer room, which we call our prayer room the War Room, based on the movie. Hope you've seen it. If you haven't, you should check it out and get it. It's called The War Room. And we want to share our hearts with you today. And we would like to thank Mr. Larry Carter. He's retired from Corvette and worked for GM. And he's one of my best helpers that I have, and I appreciate so much him doing that. He does this, edits it, and works. Let me tell you just a little bit why I like the song This Little Light of Mine. I have made several missionary trips to Haiti, and when I was there, they have what they call the Great Convention, 1,500, maybe 1,800 people there. 3 people sits in one metal chair. It's very interesting to watch. There's guys that have sticks, and if somebody's talking or if they go to sleep or whatever in church, he has a stick. There's 2 or 3 of the guys, they wear red ties, and they just walk down and knock you in the head with the stick, and you quit talking. But my first service there, the first service, they introduce all the guests, and I was probably the 3rd or 4th one to get introduced. And you have 5 minutes to say something, and I stepped to the microphone, and of course they speak Creole, and the interpreter, little guy, came up to my shoulder maybe, and they said my name and introduced me and turned it over to me, and I would say a few lines, and I'd say, I'm a candle, I give myself for the light. And the interpreter did not understand what I was saying, and he's asked me to repeat it, and I did. I'm a candle, I give myself for the light. And probably the 4th time I said that, he said, I don't understand what you're saying. And I took my hand and I went like this, like I was a candle. I said, I'm a candle, I give myself for the light. And we would be walking among the people and stuff during our off times, and I'd hear them whisper and say stuff about me, and I'd ask the interpreter, what are they saying? He said, they're saying, here comes the candle. So in several years going, I learned when I'd walk through them that they would say, here comes the candle. And it's all about the light. It's not about the candle. A candle would be worthless if it didn't give itself to the light. So let's sing, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let's do one more here. I have a thought on my heart. I woke up during the night with it, and I want to share with you. Let's sing from Isaiah. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Teach me, Lord, teach me, Lord, to wait. One more time. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Teach me, Lord, teach me, Lord, to wait. Amen. Let's go to the Word. Again, greetings in the name of Jesus Christ from Faith Assembly of God, Smiths Grove. And we're all the time adapting and trying to change things around to make them better. And of course, that is mainly Mr. Carter's. Am I need to go right or left? And I appreciate Mr. Carter. I got my hair cut yesterday, and I asked him to make me pretty, and the barber said this is not a beauty shop. So he tries his best. I want to talk about being wounded, but I probably want to start from Isaiah 40:28. Did you know common sense is not very common anymore? Sad to say that we probably the most educated society of ever, but we lack common sense. I went to college from 70 to 74, and we had a guy that was probably one of the smartest guys I ever met. He had a photostatic memory, and it was so unusual how smart he was, but he lacked common sense. He didn't know when to take a bath or change clothes or whatever, although he was very, very smart. And it got where instead of taking showers and baths, it got to the point that he would, do you remember Old Spice, the little bottle with the little plug in the top? He would just, after phys ed or whatever, he'd just splash some Old Spice on him. And that helped for a little while, but the trouble is it made it worse. And by the end of the day in the classes, wow, it's different to say the least. He had common sense, not, but he was so smart. Well, I think that can spill over into the church, that instead of repenting and confessing and changing, I believe it's awful easy just to put some Old Spice on the stink. And after a while, the stink becomes very bad. There is a parasite. I took parasitology in college, and wow, you didn't touch your hand to your mouth or anything after taking that class for a while. But a parasite is something that grows on you, and or in you, and it's like cancer. Cancer grows and grows and grows until it destroys the host, and therefore it destroys itself. Isaiah 40:28 says this, "Hast thou not known, hast thou not heard, that the everlasting God, the Lord, the Creator of the ends of the earth, faints not, neither is he weary. There is no searching of his understanding." Verse 29, "He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increases the strength. Even the youth shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall." Listen at this promise. "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. And they shall walk and not faint." I'm so thankful that the Bible says, "Let the weak say, I'm strong." I want to talk to you about being wounded. And we're going to go to Jeremiah, the 10th chapter, and we want to pick up verse 19. Jeremiah 10:19. And I want to talk about being a wounded warrior. And I want to say that we need to leave our hurt behind us. Jeremiah 10:19 says, "Woe is me for my hurt!" Exclamation mark. Woe is me for my hurt. My wound is grievous, but I say, truly this is a grief, and I must bear it. We recently have been in the vein in our lessons about scars and weariness and being small. Those things, you can look those things up on Facebook, or you can go to YouTube and look it up. Could we be hopelessly wounded? We've heard of friendly fire, a fire from the enemy, and a fire from our own troops. Is our hurt that we carry, is it a deep wound that if we don't do something about it, it will fester and destroy us? Do you realize you must face your giant? There was hundreds of Israeli soldiers camped out, and every night Goliath would curse God and curse them, and they'd go to their tents and cry themselves to sleep. And along comes this little boy, you know the story, he's pulling a wagon of bread and cheese to his brothers that are warriors. None of the warriors are willing to face the giant. This little boy says, of course he's probably a teenager, the Lord had prepared him for this day in facing the bear and facing the lion. Just like I believe whatever you are going through today, the Lord has tried to prepare you for that. And we have to learn to thrive when we're wounded. We have to learn to thrive. You'll never know the power of being wounded and how being wounded can destroy your life. But I'll tell you something, that God will crush what is crushing you if you will allow him to. Probably across the Commonwealth of Kentucky, I preach more from this one verse. I develop it many directions, but Matthew 24:10. And if you've heard me say this before, forgive me and just chalk it up to an old man rambling around. But Matthew 24:10 says, "And then many shall be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another." You know Matthew 24, they come to Jesus at the Mount of Olives, and while they are there, they ask Jesus, "Tell us when you're coming back." And Jesus can't tell them when he's coming back because he doesn't know himself. Only the Father knows. And so he does this great discourse. This discourse, he tells about famines, shortages of stuff. He tells about earthquakes. He tells about storms. He tells about things going on in the ocean, which today we call it tsunamis. He tells all of these things, but he tells this sign that's going to happen in the church. And it's going to happen in the family. We're going to be offended, he says, and we'll betray one another, and we'll hate one another. We're talking about families, and we're talking about churches. We're talking about Christians that literally hate each other. And we get wounded, and we carry this wounded spirit. You ever been in the middle and stabbed from both sides? Wounded means offended. It means upset, inflicted with injury. It means hurt. It means suffering. It means harm. It means damage, traumatic damage. What does the word hurt mean? It means wound, which we just defined. It means scattered. It means broken. It means bruised. It means anguish. And all of these things can happen in several areas. It can be physical. It can be mental. It can be emotional. And all of those things are bad in one area, will affect another area, but we really want to talk about being spiritually wounded. Spiritually wounded. Wounded means pain. It means unhappiness. It means caused by words or actions. Let me ask the question. I love to ask questions. Jesus did too. Jesus asked a bunch of questions. And the Father, when he approached Job, Job had 1,000,000 questions and demanded the Father to answer them. And when it was all over, God never answered one question from Job, not one question. But let me ask you a question. Is there a difference between head hurt, mental hurt, and heart hurt? And I will tell you, yes, I think so. And I think head hurt hurts, heart hurt, and heart hurt. Did you hear about the lady that her dad died of a heart attack? Her grandpa died of a heart attack. Her great-grandpa died of a heart attack. Her mom died of a heart attack. And she was so worried about having a heart attack, she died of cancer. Not what she was worried about. Worry has very little profit to it. What's your gold? What is a gold? Paul uses metaphors for living, and let's look at it. He talks about running a race to win, and we're going to go to 1 Corinthians 9, verse 24. Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receives the prize? So run that ye may obtain. And every man that strives for mastery is temperate, self-controlled, in all things. Now they do this for a corruptible crown, but we're not running for a corruptible crown. We're running for an incorruptible crown. Did you know? We don't know what everybody did with the crown in heaven, but we do know that those closest to the throne of God laid the crown down at the feet of Jesus Christ. Verse 26 says, I therefore so run not uncertainly, so fight I, not as one that beats the air, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. What on earth would make a person look backwards? What was in Lot's wife? We don't know her name. Mrs. Lot, I guess. What on earth was in her life that made her want to look back to Sodom and Gomorrah, especially after they had clear instructions? They had clear instructions, don't look back. She looked back. It wasn't just she looked back. There must have been something in her heart that made her look back, or that caused her to long to look back. Maybe there was a fear of going forward. I'm not for sure, but I believe God designed us to live today. Yesterday's gone. Tomorrow might not be. Life is hurt. It's pain. It's pain. It's like stepping on a Lego, I guess. We achieve so very little because we put forth less effort. When I was teaching school, I had a young student. His dad was a doctor, and his name was David. And David was so smart. He didn't have to study the spelling words. He knew them. He was, and one grading period, I gave him a B plus in effort instead of an A. Everything's A's, all A's on this report card. And his dad come and visited me and said, how can you make all A's and have a B plus in effort? I said, because he is so much more capable of achieving more than he is. He's satisfied to get an A. That if he would just apply himself a little more, if he would just give a little more effort, what he could do. And I believe that would be very true of us today, but I also know that many of us are hurt, that we're wounded, and we have to come to this point to give it up. To give it up. My son had a little bicycle that we bought from the neighbors. Their name was Leonard. And he loved that bicycle. He washed that bicycle. He took care of that bicycle. It had training wheels on it. It had hard rubber wheels on it. And how he loved to ride that bicycle. And one day I went to Rose's in Middlesboro, and I bought him a Murray. It was orange and yellow, and it had like flames on it, and it had air tires, and it was bigger. I came home and I had it in the back of my Pinto station wagon, and I said, son, let's give that bicycle to Carrie. And he said, no, Daddy, I love my bicycle. I ride it every day. I love my bicycle. And I said, son, let's give it to Carrie. Carrie lived a half a mile down the road. He didn't want to give Carrie his bicycle. But we rode down the road, and we pulled up and knocked on the door. And they came to the door, and I asked to speak to Carrie. And Carrie came to the door. She was some smaller than my son was, or younger. And he said, Carrie, I want you to have this bicycle. And he gave it to her. And as we walked away, as we walked back home, he looked back, and Carrie was riding that bicycle. Had a, what do you call, training wheels? Had training wheels on it, and she was riding it around and around in the carport. And I could see he was very sad. But he did not know, when we got home, he didn't know. I opened the hatchback of the car, and I pulled out that brand new bicycle. He had to let go. I never knew that story would develop to an illustration. But he had to let go of what he had to get something better. We have to let go of our hurt. You're not hurting anybody but yourself. When you forgive, when you set somebody free, you're not setting them free. You're setting yourself free. And it becomes this problem that if we don't identify it and run towards it, that's what David did to Goliath. He ran towards the problem. He ran towards it. And we need to go towards our problem and realize I have an issue with the wounded spirit. Let me tell you a story that I read years ago. And it's about a man that we're going to call 46664. You know that man? 46664. Sure, you know that man. You don't know him by a number. You know his name, though. His name was Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison. 27 years in prison. In one of the worst hellholes of the earth. South Africa. He was locked up in a 7-by-7 cell. No running water, no commode system, no anything. He was locked up in that prison for 18 years. He finally got out of that prison and moved to another prison. But Nelson Mandela lived in that 7-by-7. He was allowed one letter every 6 months from whoever that, but that's all. That he could only have one letter every 6 months. Twice a year he got a letter. I don't see how this man kept from being bitter and angry and hurt and destructive and all of those things, but he didn't. He didn't do that. And 46664. Wow. How could you be treated that way? He was allowed one visit a year on this island where he was held as prisoner. 27 years in 3 different prisons. Things did get a little better. And the Robben Island prison was one of the worst. He was there from 1962 to 1990, and in the 3 different ones. But in 1990, Mandela was released after 27 years of prison. And Mandela learned something while he's in prison. He watched other people. He watched other prisoners. He watched guards, some mean, some nice. He watched the people around him, and he learned that life was about attitudes and words. Keep your attitudes pure. Be quick to forgive. One time, after Mandela got out of prison, 46664, after he got out of prison, somebody asked him about his 27 years, and he said, I went for a 27-year vacation. He wrote an autobiography called The Long Walk to Freedom. But I want to tell you why I bring them up, why I bring 46664, why I bring them up. I want to tell you really one line that he said after 27 years of abuse. He said, wounds that can't be seen are painful. Those that can be seen can be cured by a doctor. But wounds that can't be seen, the wounded spirit. Listen at this one line. Let me read it to you directly so I don't misquote it. Let me read it to you. He says, as I stand before the door of my freedom, I realize that if I don't leave my pain, my hurt, my anger, and my bitterness behind me, I will still be in prison. Wow. I wouldn't have blamed him for being bitter and angry and all of those things. But he saw something that very few of us learn. As I stand before the door of my freedom, getting ready to be released, he said, if I don't leave my pain, my hurt, my anger, and my bitterness behind me, I will still be in prison. So there's a difference in mental bars and metal bars. We just have to learn. We just have to learn that life is cruel, it's mean. Expect to be wounded, but don't let that fester and become infected. I'll never go to church again because of all those hypocrites at church. You know what really amazes me? You go to Walmart with those hypocrites. It amazes me you stop at Speedway gas station with those hypocrites. But you can't come to church with them? That's a wounded spirit. let me tell you something. Do you want to go to hell with them? Besides all of that, my opinion is very simple. Everybody's a hypocrite at some time. When we want mercy for our family and judgment for somebody else's family, that's hypocritical, and we can go on. But let me tell you something. Because of Nelson Mandela, 46664, because of his attitude and because of forgiving before he came out, let me tell you something. 1993, he received the Nobel Peace Prize. In 1994, Mandela was elected president. He went from a 7-by-7 jail cell to becoming the president of South Africa. That is no more than the biblical story of Joseph that was hated by his brothers, that was thrown in the pit, that was sold into slavery, that was put on the auction block, that went to work for Potiphar, that was accused of rape, that was put in prison, that was forgotten in prison. Joseph kept his attitudes pure. And is it not amazing that Joseph took his brothers home with him and he fed them? Was it amazing? He set them. They thought they were strangers. He set them in age order at his table. He did all of that. All because he would refuse allowing wounded spirits to take charge of him. Years ago, I went to a minister's retreat. I'm Assemblies of God, and every minister's retreat I've ever been to has always been taught or preached by an Assemblies of God preacher. Our superintendent was friends with this man that pastored in Lexington, Kentucky. He'd pastored over 50 years, and he came to speak to us Assemblies of God people at Cumberland Falls, Kentucky. It's a state park there, and he was a master. In 50 years of ministry, he's an old man. He's near death. As a matter of fact, he'll die a couple of years after this event. He'll die. But he wanted to speak to the preachers from across the state of Kentucky about being hurt and being wounded in life and in ministry. And he asked this question: why do NFL players play football? Somebody yelled out, money. They play for money. And somebody else said, on the other side of the group, said, no, they play for fame. And then some older preacher in the back said, no, they don't play for money or fame. They play because they love the game. In ministry, you're going to get hurt. Phooey, if you're not in ministry in life, you're going to get hurt. There's going to be some mean things happen and all of that. But did I tell you his name? His name was Wayne B. Smith. I still have the handwritten notes that I took at that meeting, and that's been years ago, been many years ago. And he told this story that if you're going to play football or basketball, or if you're going to do anything in life, you're going to have to learn that hurt's part of life and that you're going to have to do it. He went on to tell about, I was reading in my notes, a guy named Tommy Bell. Tommy Bell was a very famous, you can look him up, you can Google him. Tommy Bell was a star NFL player. But Tommy Bell was telling about one of the greatest lessons he ever learned playing football. Tommy Bell went to Lexington. He went to Henry Clay High School in Lexington. And they was playing a game. It was real close. And Tommy came out of the game and was standing on the sideline. And his coach turned to him and said, "Tommy, what are you doing?" And Tommy said, "I come out of the game, Coach. I think I broke my leg." And the coach gave him a philosophy lesson that would change the rest of his life. He said, "Tommy, go back in and play the game until you know you broke your leg." Wow, is that cruel? Is that mean? Is that terrible? Tommy said it was a life-changing ideal that you have to play the game hurt. I don't think it was mean, but I've told the story before, and somebody said, "I think that's very mean." Well, he went on to become a very famous NFL player. One retired NFL player that I was reading about that was interviewed by a sports commentator, and he was talking to this retired player, and the retired player was in a wheelchair. The player reported he'd played 383 NFL games. But he also told a story that he had 40 surgeries, 30 plus knee surgeries, 3 back surgeries. He had 5 metal rods in his back. And the reporter asked, "Would you do it again? Would you do it again? With all of this, would you do it again?" And without any hesitation, the player answered, "Absolutely. I would absolutely do it all again." We have to learn to play hurt. We'll never make it if we don't learn to play hurt. Walter Payton played for Mississippi State, was it? They said he was too small. He could never make it in the NFL. He played 13 seasons from 1985 to 1975 to 1987. He was a running back, and the Chicago Bears was a weak team while he was playing there. He set all kinds of records. He ran 16,726 yards. He made a total of 21,803 yards. He was too small to play. He made 110 touchdowns. 10 times Walter Payton had a 1,000-yard season. He set the single game running record in 1977. Walter Payton was one of the most gifted, strongest, toughest, durable players. Once in his career, Payton missed a game one time. Why? Because of persistence. He wouldn't quit When he got knocked down, he got up. One game in 13 seasons. Can you believe that? One game. Payton's coaches and trainers were amazed at his persistence. He played when he had colds. He played when he had fever. He played when his knees was hurting. He played when his hamstrings was pulled. His elbow would get swollen real bad, but he went on and played. He had a fractured rib once. You ever had one of those? He had a fractured rib, and he kept on playing. Well, my time's running out, and I want to go to Colossians, the 3rd chapter, verse 13. I'm not talking about football or baseball or basketball. I'm talking about life. I'm talking life as a sinner. I'm talking about life as a saint. Getting wounded and getting hurt is part of life. You've got to learn to get up and go again. You're not strange. What you're going through is common. Many other people have played hurt. Many other people have quit when they got hurt. I think of 44 years in the ministry, 32 years here at Smith's Grove as the pastor, 8.5 years at a struggling mission work in Floyd County, West Prestonsburg. They closed the church down. I think how many times I've been hurt. I got hurt one time so bad. I got hurt so bad. And I couldn't sleep, and I cried, and I got up and got dressed, and I walked. I walked for hours. I cried, and I cried, and I cried. And it started raining. And I cried, and I cried. I crossed over a bridge in West Prestonsburg. It's a famous sort of rounded over bridge. And part inside of me said, jump in the river. I got in the middle of the bridge. I wasn't going to listen to that voice. I got where I couldn't jump. And I walked. And I remember saying, God, I believe your word, and I know Romans 8:28 is true. For all things work together for the good of them that love the Lord, to call according to his purpose. I believe that, but Lord, I don't see how on earth you can make good come out of this. God did. God did. Colossians 3 verse 13. Forbearing one another, forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so do ye also. Wow. Is that heavy to forgive somebody? No, it's heavy when you refuse to forgive somebody. You have an in-law, you have an outlaw, you have a son, you have a daughter. It's hurt you real bad. Somebody at church hurt you real bad. Get up and go again. Be persistent. Ephesians 4:32 says, be ye kind one to another. I love that word, kind. I love when somebody's kind to me or to my family. It goes on to say, be tenderhearted. I love to see tenderhearted kids. I've laughed a whole lot in life, but I've shed many a tear in life. It goes on to say, after tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. It all hinges on this one thing. You've got to forgive to be forgiven. It was a Jewish tradition in Jesus' day that you had to forgive somebody 7 times. And they asked him about it, and they said, Jesus, is it true we have to forgive 7 times? And Jesus said, no. You've got to forgive 7 times 70. That is 490. Am I right, Larry? That is 490 times you got to forgive. But I'm wounded. I'm hurt. That's part of life. That's part of life. No one can wound you or hurt you without your permission. If you haven't heard a word I've said, listen to that word. You have to give somebody permission to wound you and hurt you. Don't do it. And then there's others that's carried wounds for years. I visited this old lady. I started to say where, I won't say where. I visited this old lady, and she told me about a young girl got pregnant and wasn't married, and how the dad was blistering mad, and they was going to kick her out of the house and all that. And I asked the lady, if you don't mind, tell me that girl's name, and I will go to their house, and I'll try to mediate between the daughter and the dad. And the old lady looked me in the eye and said, the baby's 40 years old. The baby's 40 years old. 40 years old. Some people can't forget anything. Matthew 18:21. How oft shall my brothers sin against me, and I forgive them? Till 7 times, and Jesus answers, red letters, I say not unto you until 7 times, but until 7 times 70. I have a hero in life that's faith is much different than mine, but I've loved her testimony. Her name is Mother Teresa. You know her from Calcutta, India. She looked in the President of the United States. She looked at his eyes in a dinner that she was at and said, if you'll quit killing the babies, I'll raise them all. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'll do it. Boy, did she have guts to look that president in the eye. They bruise me. I bleed easy. It's not who hurts you that matters. What matters is if you'll get up and go again. And I know my last couple of lessons, and I hopefully will change directions here. Mother Teresa said, I found a paradox, that if you love until it hurts, there can be no more hurt, only more love. Ooh, that is, I wish I'd said that. I have found a paradox that if you love until it hurts, there can be no more hurt, only more love. Mother Teresa was approached by a college student doing an interview. And during the interview, the college student looked at this lady that had for over 50 years ministered to poor people. And he said, Mother Teresa, how's it feel to be a failure? She bowed her head and a tear run down that wrinkly old face. And she said, "What?" And he said, "How does it feel to be a failure?" Said, "You went to India to feed poor people and to help the people that had leprosy. You went there to help them. And there's more poor, hungry people today, and there's more people with leprosy today than there was when you went." Mother Teresa looked the young man in the eye and said, "I'm but a pencil in the hand of God." Hear that? I'm but a pencil in the hand of God. She said, God didn't call me to be successful. God called me to be faithful. And I asked if you would consider today that festers and will destroy you. Wounded spirits always backfire. I'd like to thank Mr. Larry Carter. I owe him a debt I could never repay. I asked if there's any way possible, would you please pass this on to somebody else? See how small my hands are. I said, God, I can't do it. Then God gives me somebody like Larry that pushes me, and say, you've got something to say. You got something to say. I will say today, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. Remember what she said? She said, I found a paradox that if you love until it hurts, there can be no more hurt, only more love. God, would you prepare my heart that all that I have left in me is love. Let's close with this. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me. We are Faith Assembly of God, the P.O. Box 331, Smiths Grove, Kentucky. We're not asking you for anything, except if you could you pass it on? You probably know somebody that's wounded, somebody that's been stung by life, somebody that death. You probably know somebody that's lonely. Could you pass this on to somebody? get back in the game until you know your leg's broke.